Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Wisdom Chat Plus. I'm Phil Holdsworth, your host. First of all, apologies. My co-host today, unfortunately, is quite ill. So Rachel Surtees, who normally joins me on these, unfortunately will not be joining us on this particular one. But I do have two wonderful guests, Rosie Lyon and Jenny Wright. Rosie, you're with the Allied Irish Bank. You're a vulnerability specialist and also financial abuse specialist. I'll come and ask you to introduce yourself in a moment. And Jenny, you're the regional manager with the Money and Pension Service. And thank you, Jenny, for returning to Wisdom Chat. Really appreciate you being here. Rosie, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, no, sure. Hello, my name's Rosie Lyon. I am 28 years old and I'm based in the Essex area in the UK. I am a vulnerability specialist working in the banking sector. I am qualified in domestic abuse and in financial abuse. I am also known as being the winner of Young Banker of the Year worldwide, hosted by the Chartered Banker Institute in 2021, with my idea for a fairer financial future for sufferers and survivors of domestic abuse. I was also shortlisted for Banking and Finance Businesswomen of the Year of 2022. And I do a lot of work on the domestic abuse field from my own personal experience.
Thank you very much, Rosie. And wow, well done in terms of the awards and nominations. So thank you. Jenny, just introduce yourself if you would.
Well, how do you follow that?
I know.
So, well, at least I've been asked back once, so that's great. That's a good start, isn't it? So I'm Jenny Wright. I'm based in Sheffield, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am because I'm a lady of a certain age, so nobody needs to know about that. I've been over 30 years in financial services in one way, shape or form. Started my career off in banking and bank assurance, and then moved into third sector, working with Age UK, Citizens Advice, and now the Money and Pension Service. So working with lots of different types of people in all weird ways around their money, whether they've got lots of money or no money at all. You name it, I've probably done most of it. So yes, great to be back.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I really appreciate that. I like you, an individual of a certain age, around 25 years experience in the finance industry, and I've seen it both in terms of the very wealthy, having worked for the investment management world, and then also in the money and debt advice side as well. So like yourself, seen an awful lot of vulnerability and challenges people face. The subject today we're going to cover obviously is financial and economic abuse, and I know it's a very difficult subject. So for any of our listeners, we will make sure that there are links to services that can help and support if you or you know anybody who's experiencing any form of abuse. I've got this figure here. 8.7 million people report experiencing economic abuse, and I believe this is a figure from 2021. So knowing the fact that COVID has had quite a drastic impact on everybody, and in some ways, some of these figures I would imagine have arisen. I mean, what do you see at the moment, Rosie, with regards to this particular area?
Yeah, in regards to economic abuse, there is lots of people that experience economic abuse. They say I think it's around 95% of people that experience domestic abuse experience economic abuse as well. It's a very high number, and we just see in the news that they just keep rising and rising. A lot of people that have experienced economic abuse, similar to myself, they have reached out to me for sort of advice in the banking sector and what they can do. I just feel like that we're going in the right direction in certain ways in the financial sector, but I feel like there's so much more that needs to be done for these people that need to be able to rebuild their lives after abuse. Because for me, it's very much, once you go through economic abuse, which generally includes debt, that then impacts your credit scoring, and then that's with you as a prison sentence, as I call it, for decades, and that stops you from rebuilding your life. So it's something I'm extremely passionate about.
Yeah, I noticed when I read through some of the research around this and the materials, one thing that really struck me was the numbers of people who, if you look at the signs, are experiencing a form of abuse, but don't necessarily recognize it as abuse. Is that something in the mix of everything that you've just said you come across?
Yeah, that's correct. And I can speak from personal experience as well with, I think it was very much domestic abuse wasn't really spoken about before. It was very a taboo subject, like most vulnerabilities, I'd say. And it was very much stereotyped, and the myth of that domestic abuse was only physical. And if a physical altercation didn't happen, then that wasn't a form of domestic abuse. I'd experienced financial and economic abuse for a long period of time. And, it was something that I just presumed is something that you did for your partner, lend them money, financially help each other out. But really and truly, it was much more than that. And it wasn't until after I'd left that relationship, educated myself, that I realised that. And then post-separation, when the main form for me that the economic abuse started happening. But there's lots of individuals, all genders, that I come across with all the work that I do that do experience and don't realise it until afterwards.
Yeah. Jenny, you remember you and I spoke at an event in Newcastle last year. And one of the things that really struck me at that event was there was a lady in the group who actually came up to me and shared her story with me. And it really struck me that she was one of these people who had suffered a form of, economic abuse, albeit that she'd moved on and was with a new partner. It was a very, very difficult experience, clearly. But what she found herself in now was a partner who wanted to help and support and involve in the house, and she wouldn't let him, because it was like a trigger going back to when she was experiencing this abuse. And it just stopped me in my tracks and made me think about what's going on. I mean, what kind of things have you and the Money and Pension Service come across?
So the work that we do at Money and Pension Service is really broad reaching, and we sort of cover and work with people from, very young children right through to older adults, people that have retired. And, sort of relating to my own personal experience around what you just mentioned about that person that you spoke to, once you've been in a situation yourself, you sort of become very guarded in future relationships, and I learned a long time ago that I needed to protect myself around money, and I have done that as a matter of course. So I have my own stuff, if you like, and even after sort of 15 years of being married to my husband now, we still have conversations, and he says, well, no, I'll get you that, and I'll go, no, I'll get it, it's fine, I'll sort that out. So it does stay with you for a very, very long time. But sort of looking at the raft of people that we work with, I'm conscious that due to cost of living rises, there's real impact on relationships. So people that might not have found themselves in a difficult or really hard situation previously, the pressure around money in the home, or lack of finances, might be making people do things that they've not previously done before, and that's really impacting relationships and putting a lot of pressure on households, including children in households as well. And another thing that I've thought of while you were talking about your story, Rosie, and the stuff that you've been doing, is working with older people when I was at Age UK, traditionally, men have managed finances in the household, and that was a traditional thing. And I've come across quite a few older ladies that have not been allowed, in inverted commas, to deal with the finances because their husband was looking after them and protecting them. But then, as we know, men tend to die before women do, and these older, this cohort of older ladies really, really struggled then because they didn't know how to manage their finances. They didn't know what income was coming in and things like that. So whilst that's not necessarily abuse, it's creating a difficult and challenging situation for a partner, which manifests itself in really sad things later on in life. So this is so massive, and it can touch so many different people. It's really great to be talking about it today. And there's a lot of help on the Money Helper website as well.
Yeah,
anybody can access, free impartial guidance. I previously, coming onto this chat now, just searched financial abuse, and we've got loads and loads of information on there as well.
Yeah. I just picking up what you're saying there about the sort of the older generation. I've seen that in my own family, where it has been in this case, and I'm not saying always, but in this case, that the man has held the control over the finances. And actually, when you look at the definition behind financial abuse and economic abuse, and we'll come on to the differences between those in a moment, if we may. But control plays a big part. Control is not necessarily something that somebody set out to do, but it's very easy in some respects, if they're afraid of something, to fall into that controlling sort of element. But equally at the same time, we know there's mental health issues around this, and people wanting to control. It's actually understanding, where does this come from and what does it look like? And sometimes it can be seemingly innocent, but when you actually look at what's going on, the behavior around it, you realize actually this is not healthy at all. And when we see individuals who remain, particularly in the older generation, they're not able to manage their own financial affairs, and they become extremely vulnerable then, and have to find somebody they can trust to help them through the process. And I've seen that in my own family. But I understand what you're saying about the sort of the control side. That is quite a complex area. Is that something that you see, Rosie, in terms of elements involved in whether it's financial or economic abuse? And what would you say are the differences?
Yeah, no, definitely. So financial and economic abuse, they come hand in hand. So I see it as sort of an umbrella. So at the top, we've got domestic abuse. Underneath that's economic, and underneath that is the financial abuse. So financial abuse, I see it as individuals controlling the finances of somebody. Economic abuse is exactly the same. However, it's broader. So we're looking at the economic stability of somebody, and that can include stuff as controlling property, for instance, having mortgages and, refusing to sell or putting debt in that person's name. And it is so broad. And I think some places
sorry, Rosie, for interrupting, but even controlling their work, I was reading about. Yeah. Which is shocking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We see that quite a lot. I do work with a charity called EDAC UK, and they get individuals that have gone through domestic abuse back into the workplace, because one of the things that someone does is to isolate them, to stop them from working, so they don't have that financial means and financial independence themselves. So that is one thing that I see quite a lot in other survivors that speak to me about their stories. Yes.
I think the area of control, I know fear sits behind it. and oftentimes we can look at the present situation and perhaps deal with the present situation as we see it. But for the individual, not just the victim, but also the perpetrator, if we're ever going to address behavior, then we perhaps, and this is just me thinking out aloud, we perhaps need to look at the root cause and see if there's anything that can be done to alleviate what the root cause was. I mean, you were on the receiving end, Rosie, but I mean, what are your thoughts regarding that? Because there's the victim side, but there's also the perpetrator side as well.
There is, that's correct. Like, so the victim survivors that go through it, there's a lot that needs to be done in the financial sort of sector to help those people rebuild their lives, but also to look at a perpetrator and actually hold them accountable for their actions is something, you know, you see it in sort of police. We talk about police, for instance, and we see it in, there's not much that could be done on financial abuse by law, if in all honesty. But, you know, even in regards to domestic abuse, the broader, so the different types of abuse, the conviction rates are so low. And people, as I'd say, and this is my own personal opinion, that quite a lot of people get away with doing that stuff. Or, you know, there's cases that are dropped due to lack of evidence. And then that individual's like, well, I didn't actually do that because, let's see, I've got the proof here that the police have said, you know, they've dropped the case. And I think that's something I see quite a lot, which is an issue, because then people just think that they're not actually the problem.
Yeah. There is a thing, I don't know, that people use different terms, but one I've come across oftentimes is psychological projection, which is about projecting on others the issue that actually belongs to, in this case, say, the perpetrator. So, and they become very, very good at sort of trying to cover their tracks. So, you know, from one end, you can really understand why it's very, very difficult to bring about convictions in terms of, you know, providing the evidence. But equally, it doesn't lessen the impact on the victim, does it? And the long-term effects that it then has. What kind of helps and supports? I mean, Jenny, you related to this earlier, and I know you did as well, Rose. But let's just have a look at some of the helps and supports that's out there for people, so they know they're not on their own.
Yeah, so sort of generically about money, and I know Rosie will come in with much more specific stuff, but just money in general, Money Helper website and our helpline is there to sort of have those initial conversations and initial research. Our Money Helper helpline is non-judgmental. It's a good place to start and have a conversation with a real person, because you might not even know what's going on, and you might have a question about something that actually then identifies that you are in a bad situation and you need other forms of support to get out of that, and we would signpost you to the relevant support. The other place, as I said, Age UK. If you've got an older relative that you're worried about, or you're older yourself and you're thinking, you know, I need to talk to somebody, again, they're specialists in dealing with older people, and they would then signpost you onto the right organisation if they needed to do that. But Rosie, obviously you've got much more specific stuff than I have.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jenny. And to go in with elder abuse to start with, there's also another charity called Hourglass. So I've seen work that they do as well. So that's a very good charity that I'd highly recommend. In regards to sort of support and to think, you know, am I going through this? Is this, because, you know, we all think that when we're first going through it, it's like, am I really going through that? I'm not sure if I actually fit into that. I highly recommend Surviving Economic Abuse, also known as C. They're a second line charity, so not someone that you just, you know, that you can pick up the phone and they have like a helpline by themselves, but they have lots of information. They work alongside multiple banks within the UK as well, doing training, helping us with anything and everything that we need to know about. They also have a survivors forum that can be signed up to by a survivor anonymously on their website to talk about with other survivors, and they also partnered with, I think it's Money Advice Plus, I could have that wrong, but it's a financial abuse helpline. So the helpline, you can phone up and they can give advice on what can be done and stuff like that. So I highly recommend them, because they're one of the only charities really and truly that I know of in a banking sort of finance world that we know of, surviving economic abuse, because they solely talk about economic abuse and it's not like broader, if that makes sense. So I do highly recommend them.
We will try and make sure that we've got all this information alongside this podcast. The other thing I was thinking about was the domestic abuse helpline, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, and the number for that, if anybody wants to phone or needs to talk to somebody, is 0808 2000 247. So that's 0808 2000 247. And there is quite a lot of help there. But you touched on something that's important there, Rosie, and that is people recognizing when they're in the midst of that form of abuse. What are some of the signs that people, may be able to see? Because often they're there. It's just whether they want to acknowledge it's there or believe that they're actually in the midst of it. What kind of things are they looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it will vary from case to case, person to person, but some things that we can see is it's very broad, but in regards to financial and economic abuse, as we touched on briefly, is about, sabotaging your work. So, turning up at your work, making you late for work. They could say to you that you don't need to work, you can stay with the child at home. That could be all genders, by the way, not just the female, that it's all the myth that it is. That you can stay at home and I'll financially provide for you. And that sounds great to some people, but then it comes to the fact that you won't have your own income, and then that individual may or may not say, I'll give you pocket money, checking your receipts when you go out, making sure you're not spending on bigger brands, or asking you to shop cheaply for yourself and the children, but for the individual, making sure you buy more stuff. It could also look at joint bank account, so taking away your financial independence of your own bank account and just having a joint bank account, putting debt in your name, and making you have debt in your name with or without your consent, or the fear that you need to do that. If you leave a relationship, there could be elements of refusing to sell, pay, or leave a joint mortgage property, which means that then you could go into arrears. The only option may be the repossession route, which will damage your credit scoring for decades, as I say. Same with any sort of debt with credit cards, going overdrawn in the joint bank account, drawing out money that's yours but using it for their own benefit rather than anything else, stopping paying the bills. Lots of different examples there, and there's lots that I've seen there within this sort of financial and economic abuse sector. That's unfortunately well known. Yeah,
it's at the end of the day, anybody listening to this podcast perhaps needs to understand that when we're dealing with money, and especially within relationships, that it's a joint thing. There's choice. It's not about control. It's about choice. It's about discussing. It's about agreeing between you. So if anybody ever feels that they've not been able to agree, they've been cajoled into doing things they didn't feel was appropriate, or they just don't have a choice, full stop, then quite possibly they are in that situation where they're experiencing some form of financial or economic abuse. And not to really sort of close their eyes to this, but actually perhaps seek some help and advice. And it could be that, on the softer end, it could be the other person doesn't realize what they're doing. But on the more harsher end, the person clearly does realize what they're doing, and that they've got their own agenda, basically. and they're going to use others to fulfill that agenda. So I think the thing that really struck me is the long-term effects. And I know Rosie and yourself, Jenny, you both alluded to this, the long-term effects, and it could be years afterwards. And as I was saying very early on with the individual I was speaking to at an event Jenny and I were speaking at, that this is years down the track, and yet there are those trigger points that keep bringing back the strength of feeling that a person felt at the time, and the fears that it brings with it. I mean, what's your thoughts on this, and how could possibly or how could somebody receive the help that they really need to actually address those elements, not just the actual event itself?
That's a very hard question to answer, and I think it's all about the individual as well. And you know, you've got to recognise that you're in that situation. B, you've got to try and get out of it and try and rebuild your life. And C, be mindful that, like you said, there will be triggers and it will impact you. But I think from my point of view, it's all around educating younger people right from the word go about what is acceptable behaviour, what isn't, and trying to change people's behaviour from a young age. I think that's important, and how you do that is another big question. But I think talking about it like we're talking about it today, and raising awareness of these things going on, and also the reason why that might be happening, and particularly at the moment with the challenges around cost of living rises and the real pressure on families and couples, partnerships around money, which might be sort of setting things off that wouldn't normally happen. I think just knowing that there are people that you can talk to in the first instance, it is really important. And like you said, Phil, you're going to share that information, but it's a big thing, and we all need to work together on it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, any thoughts on this, Rose, in terms of like your own experience years later, the triggers, the kind of things that come to mind, or moments when there's that memory there?
Yeah, for me, it was very difficult because I had a property repossessed due to the joint mortgage, and that went on. That only just finalised last week. That's been going on since 2019. So, things like that, it's taken a really long period of time. COVID hasn't helped. But what I think from that is, and I was treated poorly in regards to, like, say, the bank, the high street, not the bank that I work for, obviously, but a bank, and they're aware of that. It is all about, raising that awareness. So raising that awareness, sharing stories, having people understand, and, training. So training in workplaces, in schools as well, from specialised charities, lived experiences, sharing their stories, however you see it fit, because again, that's educating somebody on what the impacts. I don't think people, when I started doing the talks that I do, say in banks, I don't think people realise the financial impact something like this has on an individual until they hear somebody else. Because if you haven't been through it, you're not really to know unless you've got an interest in it. And then for me also, is one of the key things in workplaces is to make sure that there's sort of domestic abuse policies for staff, because again, staff that are going through that, but then also again, it educates people, because they're like, it's a new policy, you read it, it's something that then is like a high priority, and then lots more things. I could sit and talk about it for hours.
No, I appreciate that. And I was actually going to ask you about your thoughts in terms of employers, because obviously people listening to the podcast may well be an employer themselves and wonder, what can I do? how can I help? Where do I start? I mean, we are talking, even when you're just talking about the financial side, I think there's more employers beginning to engage with it, but I still think for many there's still that sort of reticence, because they think I'm not really sure how to deal with this. I don't know where to start with it, and so on. But those that are, it's important for them to be aware, and I suppose, doing what we're doing now in the conversation that we're having, but more besides the training, like you say, Rosie, that you're doing, that within that there is really an emphasis on good behavior and what happens when it isn't, and how you can get the help and support. But also from an employer point of view, creating an environment where people feel safe to be able to talk about these things. I think we probably all agree on this, that money for many people is not an easy thing to talk about, full stop, even when things are going well. It's always seen as, well, it's personal, it's private, we don't talk about these things, as though you're actually, you're being rude or disrespectful. But actually, money's it's just an object. It's just a tool to do something with, to enable us in some way, shape or form. And yet we see it, in a light as though it has a power of itself that we can't possibly talk about. And so we perhaps have still a lot of work to do to get that conversation going. And workplaces are good places to create an environment where somebody can feel safe, not be judged, and not be poked fun at. Because somebody's struggling with something and other people aren't. But so that's a good place. We spend a lot of time in our workplaces, but also schools. Jenny, you mentioned this, and I know Rosie, you alluded to it as well. Educating them at a young age about appropriate behaviour. We just don't do that in the schools, do we? We're not to the extent that we should do. And it's all well and good as learning maths if we're going to actually use the things that we learn. But the things we will definitely use are how to manage money and how to behave with money, and what kind of attitudes are good attitudes to have around money. These are the kind of things perhaps we ought to be considering training our younger generation around. I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of our present education system and what possibly could be done. And even in the workplace, I know, Jenny, you're talking to employers all the time, aren't you? With the helpers side, and you're doing lots of presentations. I mean, what kind of conversations have you come across with employers for and against?
So some employers are sort of a little bit scared about getting involved in educating people around money and their finances, and they don't necessarily see that as their role. And they think, there's this issue around giving people advice, etc. But I sort of explain to them that on a real basic level, if they've got a health and well-being strategy, which this financial and economic abuse and domestic abuse could fit within that as well. If they've got that strategy and they've got like a site on their intranet, a staff page, financial wellbeing or whatever, then all they need to do is put some basic signposting links on there. Employers are seen as a trusted source of information, and therefore if some really useful links are put on a staff intranet page or shared through emails or staff newsletters, then that is seen as a trusted space and where to get good information from. So it can be a lot easier than people think, and you don't have to get too involved in it. It's just having that basic stepping stone there. But then obviously Rosie could help organizations really do the training around what abuse looks like and how that can impact individuals in the workplace. And again, we talk a lot about the impact that has on a business as well. So we're looking at that, from a person perspective, but also from a business perspective. And sometimes when you talk to businesses about that, then they like to see that, actually it could have a good impact on us as a business, let alone the individual seeking that guidance and support as well. So employer, good place to start.
What about the banking industry, Rosie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think when it comes to domestic abuse, financial and economic abuse, I think in the banking sector, we've come quite a long way. We have, quite a few of us are part of the Financial Abuse Code that was created by UK Finance. It's not mandatory, but some banks are involved in that, and you've seen a lot of work in that, and that pledges that we have to do more for our customers, as well as, presumably do it for our staff as well, which we have. But what I'd say is, if anybody wanted to, do more, it's very much, raise that awareness. You can have somebody come in to talk, or you might know somebody. So there's some charities that are fully funded by the Home Office, by the National Lottery, that would come and do talks for free, because we're talking about cost of living and budgeting. I think it's the same for businesses as well. And there's there's EDA, the Employees Initiative Domestic Abuse. They obviously do a membership, which is free. You sign up. They do quarterly talks, but they also have templates of how to put policies into place and what to include for their staff as well. So that's a really good starting point. And I fear for instance, if you do a policy, to make sure that your staff are aware of it, and that it's not just sort of like a tick box, not saying it would be, but a tick box exercise where it's there and we can say that we've done it. But then also it could factor in with inclusion and diversity, which is something that is extremely big at the moment in the banking sector. So domestic abuse falls into that as well. So that could be, that could go into that.
Yeah, I know the Domestic Abuse Act was updated in 2021. It's also included new terms such as, was it coercion? Have I got that one right? Yeah. And so there's a lot more emphasis being put on it. But I think you're right. It's just raising awareness and letting people know, like employers and individuals, where they can get help and support, and they don't have to, like an employer, don't have to worry that, it's not their area, they're not experienced in it, they don't know what they're doing. There are lots of people out there who could help and support them put things in place and create that environment that people do feel safe. I think one of the issues that I'm seeing of late is there's a lot of employers out there really struggling to fill positions for all manner of reasons. And I think one of those reasons is people feel safe and secure. So they look at things like that in a workplace. What do other people say about it? So from a reputational point of view, and from just doing the right thing to help and support employees to have some of these things in place and a safe environment for people to talk, is actually a real plus for an organization. And people then will talk about it, and maybe then it's not so difficult then to fill positions. The other side as well is for the individual, the help and support. I can't imagine in my own mind what it must feel like for somebody going through what they're going through and feeling very lonely and isolated in it. But the one thing that comes across time and time again is, you're not alone. And there are people out there like yourself, Rosie, who completely do understand what it feels like, and can help either point them in the right direction or get alongside them and support them. If people have questions from this podcast for both of you, how could they get hold of you, or what would be the best way to sort of make contact if they wanted to sort of ask you any sort of questions? Rosie, how about yourself?
Yeah, for me, my best sort of platform is my LinkedIn. So Rosie Lyon, my LinkedIn profile. That's how people get hold of me. People that experience it. they do contact me. I can do signposting, give some sort of advice. I'm happy to do that, not a problem.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Appreciate that. And yourself, Jenny, somebody's wanting any sort of helps and support, how could they get hold of yourself?
So you can contact me at jenny.wright@maps.org.uk, or also on LinkedIn under Jenny Wright as well. My profile's on there.
Thank you both very much. Really appreciate, as being able to talk about this difficult subject. And no doubt people listening to it may themselves have experienced some of those triggers, memories of experiences. So if anybody has experienced or is experiencing or knows somebody who's experiencing some form of abuse, we're going to include contact details where you can get help and support. If you do have any questions you'd like to put to our guest, Jenny Wright, thank you very much, from the Money and Pension Service, and for Rosie Lyon from the Allied Irish Bank, and also survivor, as you say, of domestic abuse. Thank you both for coming along and talking about this difficult subject. Really appreciate it. And all the very best going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.